Welcome to the inaugural episode of Practice Make Perfect, a Third Strike podcast with the goal of giving in-depth discussions on how players have and can improve at the game. So to start, we're going to be interviewing some players, getting some of their backstory, their opinions on a wide variety of subjects. And these will range from different approaches to practice, opinions on reviewing matches, be it their own or top players, particular learning styles, and how they personally use their time when it comes to the game in regards to improvement as the main focus, and much more. And this episode features one of, if not the strongest players in the country, Nica KO. Hi Lloyd, how's it going today?
Hello. Hello, everybody. What's up, Collins?
Sup. So this is going to be a little bit more formal than I guess some of the other podcasts. So let's get started. So when you first started the game, what was your main character?
Well, surprisingly, my main character was actually Ryu.
Okay.
I pretty much got into it just because of the character itself and how appealing his story was to me. That world warrior kind of character who just looks for the best fight in every aspect.
Right.
And yeah, I kind of just took a liking to him when I first started playing, and my character choices evolved as the years went on.
So like, how did your actual character progression go then? If you started with Ryu, how'd you end up at Yang?
Well, when I first started, it was something where I started watching videos like everyone else, and obviously the Daigo parry was the main unifying factor for everyone.
Right.
So for me, I kind of just took a liking to the game based on that, and then from there I went to Ryu, and I kind of just explored it a bit more and kind of figured, okay, let me go through the Shotos to see how they are. I played Second Impact previously, so I kind of have an understanding of how they move and how they work. So I went to the Shotos, and then from there, I kind of started exploring with other characters. So basically, Yun and Yang came afterwards.
Right.
And the Yun and Yang period came obviously after the whole Daigo parry, after the whole Evo 2K3, 2K4 part.
And KO was so strong.
When KO was so strong, and obviously he was the one who dominated both those tournaments.
Right.
So I started to see Gamers Vision ranking battles and just go from there. And anytime that I found some interesting setup or pretty much something strong with a particular character, I would just go strictly to that character just to try it, and then just try to do it. And
sorry to
it's something that,
but your microphone's a little staticky.
Oh, sorry about that.
Sorry.
But yeah, so basically just my character progression came from the experiences that I had. So it can be from the Gamers Vision's ranking battles that I saw, or just simply, me playing against the locals, me playing online or anything like that. So, it was all based on my experience, but the most experience that I've seen and that I've had was obviously Yun and Yang,
Right.
due to watching KO all the time.
So would you consider yourself an online warrior?
There was a time where, not that I considered myself an online warrior, but there was a time where people considered me an online warrior. Mainly because from about 2008 to 2010, I strictly played, and a couple of years before that too, so around 2007, 2008, I played strictly online. And
so like
at that
Kylera, GGPO, 2D.
I went through everything from Kylera to P2P to 2DF to GGPO, to Supercade, Fightcade, everything. And obviously, luckily because of the online aspect, I was able to play in online tournaments that were ran weekly, and I got my experience from there. So because I was so well known in the online portion of the game,
Right.
when I finally went to play at like Chinatown Fair or offline at tournaments, people didn't know me. And people would think of me as like, oh, that only works online, like empty jump, low short into EX slashes would only work online. But then you do it to people offline and it's like, oh wow, this does work offline.
Right.
So that little transition period, it's more of like not necessarily me being known as an online player or an online warrior, so to speak, but it's definitely where I base most of my experience off of when I first started.
So you mentioned the online tournaments. How important were those to you building the confidence as a player, like to succeed?
Well, honestly speaking, online tournaments were actually tremendously helpful when it comes to my confidence as a player. I think from a competitive standpoint, every player uses casuals to determine how, where they stand. They would say you can play a specific player that in your local area, and you can go toe to toe with him. You play someone outside of your area, and you kind of don't do the same. You don't have the same results.
Varying play styles and all that.
Yeah, exactly. And I think once you start getting over the whole matchup aspect and you start to realize that there are certain quality of players that you kind of have to play against, and a generalization could be said that you play I think we spoke about this before, but lower level players can be used to build that confidence for yourself.
Right.
It doesn't necessarily matter the skill gap. It could be someone who's, just not there yet, or somebody who's just brand new. But from that point, someone who's at the same level, or a little bit above, or a little bit below, they can be used just to kind of discover yourself as a player and say, okay, you know what, this works. Okay, I know where I stand now, and kind of what to work on generally. When you play against the top players, that's where you start to learn the nitty gritty, the specifics of everything that you need to know. What specifically in your game is destroying you, basically. For me, I said this story before, but I had a huge issue with wake up guest pairing.
A lot of people do, especially in the online scene now, especially in America. Like, we all just do the wake up guess.
Yeah, and when you're transitioning between being a good player to above average or wherever your skill level is in that aspect, obviously you know how to do combos, you know how to space properly, sort of, you know how to, hit your opponent basically.
Right.
It's that transitional phase where you have to worry about your defense, and it's that aspect where you kind of have to discover what the weakness is by playing the top players. So for me, when I first started playing online, luckily I was able to play against good players. I was able to play against Exo, Tenren, Chiridi, KO Fiend. I played against all the good players that were well known, and all of it was pretty much the same. And I can actually recall a specific conversation that it was a specific conversation online that Exo had with Chiridi. He just threw it out there in the chat. He was like, hey, Chiridi, what, like when you play Nica, what do you think his biggest weakness is? And he's like, oh, he wake up guest pairs all the time. And he's like, you see, I told you. And I'm like, I really took a step back and I was like, are you serious? It really is that big of a problem?
Right.
I had to watch videos of myself to see literally replicate myself to see, you know, in terms of muscle memory, what exactly am I doing in a particular situation. So in that sense, I kind of just had to take a step back and said, okay, you know what? The next time I get into this situation, I'm going to put my hand behind my back. You know, my hand that's hovering over the buttons. I'm going to just put my hand behind my back, and anytime that I guess parry, I can't do anything because my hand is behind my back. I will be forced at that point to either guess parry and block, or not do anything at all.
Right.
And I did that consistently for about a good, 2 weeks to a month, and I finally got out of the habit of guest pairing every single time I wake up. And luckily, because of the tournaments that were taking place online, I was able to finally kind of transition into that above average to sort of high level status of a player.
Okay. So, did you ever change characters because you weren't performing well with that character? Like, a lot of players that I've talked to, have character crisis even when they're learning the game, where they think that winning is one of the more important aspects, and obviously winning feels good. But, there's a lot of players that will play one character and then they'll do well against the people that they play against, and then they'll play better players or whatever and they'll do worse, and then they'll drop the character and go learn a new character. Like, do you think that this is like an important process of figuring out what character is right for you, or do you think it's harmful to like the overall end goal of being a better player?
Well, it varies based on the actual person themselves, because everyone learns differently.
Right.
But I always said that character crises are the worst thing to have. So if I'm having trouble with a specific character, it's a little bit detrimental to me to kind of work on something with another character. Right. And focus strictly on that, unless you're committing to that other character.
Like a transition.
Yeah, exactly. Now, unless the character is, pretty similar in style, then it's even better. It's a lot easier to make that transition. But in my case, I actually ran through a bad stretch of time where I used to play Yun, and this was obviously after the me watching KO and everything like that. And I was playing at Chinatown Fair, and every time I picked Yun, it started to get to the point where it was like people were repairing 1-2-3 into shoulder, people were pairing the 1-2-3, people were escaping from my Gunajin. I had no variance. I had absolutely no other idea of how to proceed with Yun. And the most interesting thing is that because of that happening to me, I sort of looked towards, for me, I kind of looked towards what KO did, and he switched to Yang. For him, he switched to Yang because of Boss being on his team during that SPO. He picked Yang for that tournament because Boss picked Yun, and they were on teams with MLV. So
I didn't know that was the original reason that he did it.
Yeah, that was the original reason. When I went to Japan, I strictly asked him about that, and he ended up discovering that he really enjoyed playing Yang because of the play style and everything like that. And in a similar fashion, I felt the same way. It was more than just me watching KO and kind of understanding what he's doing, but it also fit in with my personal playstyle. I always like to be the aggressive type to kind of force my opponent to commit to an option that I want them to commit to.
Right.
A lot of people overlook that aspect of just simply, when you play the neutral game, Are you just pressing, jump forward with Makoto? Are you just dive kicking just to get in with Yun and Yang? Are you just pressing low forward just to space out? Or are you actually doing that for a purpose? Are you trying to control that so that you can force your opponent to jump? Are you trying to control the air so you can keep him grounded so you can do dash up command grab?
Right.
Little nuances like that is what made the difference. And making that transition from Yun to Yang, because I had so much trouble, it helped out tremendously.
So now, since you play so many characters at a high level, you have a strong Chun, you have a strong Ken, a strong Makoto, you play pretty much the entire cast. What skills specifically transitioned backwards? Because now, you were on the 2018 pre-coup team with arguably the strongest Yuns in the world, right? So, your skill level with that character obviously improved. So what helped you moving backwards, going from Yang back to Yun? Like, what skills did you learn as Yang that specifically helped you get over the issues that you were having with Yun, that made you drop him to begin with?
So actually, I felt a lot more confidence as a player.
Right.
And, even though my variance with Yun wasn't there in the beginning, years went by where I started to learn new setups. I started to kind of understand why and how Yun is actually so cheap as he is. But the specific point for Yang where you get the opponent into the corner, you force them to do what you want to do, and then you get your stun. That's something that you obviously can't do with Yun.
Right.
But what you can do is take that aggressiveness and use it as a form of building meter. So every single point that I got, whether it be a dive kick that landed at the knees, just spacing out properly with certain normals, I always used everything I could to get my meter whenever I could. And then alongside that, I obviously went with the learning process of like learning the new setups, like keeper gen resets, high punch loops, and resets mid screen. Little things like that made all the difference.
Right.
And it really showed a progression overall as me as a player, rather than the actual character itself. Because the character's tools will always remain the same. They've always been the same.
Right.
But it's how you think about using them as a player. It's what makes a difference. So,
and that also varies like a lot by player. Like, you can tell almost every Yun who they are by not only the color they pick, but by the decisions they make in their good agent. Do they do the resets? Do they just force the corner with shoulder, shoulder, shoulder? How do they approach things? Do they like to use Zempo? Do they prefer to try to get you to confirm, using Zempo as like the catalyst to making you fear being grounded to begin with?
Even something as simple as the combos.
Right.
The combo selection is something that really tells you, okay, does this guy know what he's doing, or is he a little unsure?
Right.
If he was a confident player, he would go for either the typical damage, which is pretty safe and there's nothing wrong with that, or the max damage, which is something that you tend to do sometimes.
So but then to some degree, but
but that's neither here nor there.
Exactly.
But but regardless, they can have whatever combos they have during an agent, but the true point of what makes them a good player, not a good Yun player, but a good player, is how they deal with everything else.
Right.
How do they even get to that situation of landing that combo? Do they get to that situation consistently? For me, I find that my neutral gameplay will get me a meter within like 5 seconds of the round, maybe even faster than that. And it's all a matter of how you analyze the other player too. Are they putting themselves at risk? Then you can take advantage and you get meter from that.
Right.
And obviously not strictly speaking about Yun, but you can apply this to any character. You can apply it to Urian, Ken, Akuma, Chun, Makoto, anybody.
And meter management is like really important regardless of the character you play.
Exactly, and that's something that you learn as you go on. Before when I was making my transition, between the years of about 2010 to 2012, my meter management wasn't really all there. I had a little trouble of just kind of recognizing, okay, when do I go in? Does my opponent have meter here? And if they did, then I wouldn't think twice about it. I would just go in no matter what.
Right.
And it cost me a couple of games here and there. But
would you say that meter management, as far as using your own meter and realizing or how your decisions change based on your opponent's meter, like, was one of the hardest things to learn? Or what was like one of the hardest aspects of learning and mastering like Yang? Not just specifically like the game itself, because that's transitional for every character, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
If it's something that took you 2 years to fully grasp, what else was there that was as difficult, specifically for learning your character?
Well, the whole meter management was more of me as a player, not necessarily the character. The character, I pretty much can tell when I have EX meter, when I have meter here, when I have meter there. That's something that me as the character, I can recognize, okay, this is something that I can commit to. If I'm playing as Urian and I have, just a sliver of bar left before I get my first meter, I can do tackle from full screen and not worry about the repercussions unless the opponent jumps.
Right.
Or if the opponent parries or something like that. But, you have that liberty of saying, I can make this decision given what I have. It's like you give yourself 2 nails and a screwdriver, like what can you do with it?
Right.
Or 2 nails and a hammer, like what can you do with it? And it's like some people can build Noah's Ark if they really could, but that's like Japanese level.
Right.
Where they literally have like the most minuscule of tools at the start, but they transition that into something even greater. And that's what makes them, the top of
It's almost like an art form.
It is, yeah. And it may be sort of comical to say like, oh, it's a fighting game, like, it's not an art form kind of thing, but
right.
the mental aspect of it, the confidence that you need, the awareness that you need, and just the knowledge that you need of everything that's around you are just some of the few things that will either make or break you as a player. And it's what makes this game so difficult, because in this game, it's so much more specific given any particular situation.
Right. It doesn't help that, regardless of if you're positive or negative or whatever, there's always interactions with your opponent. Like, that's one of the reasons Daigo doesn't like the game. But
mm-hmm.
that's a reason why so many people love the game.
Yeah. Some people love the game because of the various options that it gives. Like, I know for me, I personally enjoy the game because of the many different decisions that I have,
mm-hmm.
and the many different decisions that my opponent can do to counter that. So it's like that back and forth of mental, that mental battle that you're having with the other opponent. All things created equal, obviously, if they're the same skill level. It's one of the most enjoyable experiences when playing.
Right, because it's ever evolving.
Exactly. It's like I can play Frankie like 10 games straight, and me and him will always adjust to every single thing that we do.
Right.
And it's like when I first see him I remember one specific tournament, or not even a tournament. It was the exhibition.
Mm-hmm.
It was the Fight Club 1 exhibition, and I remember he just he killed me with the dash up low short short into super, and he won the set that way. The next time I played him in a tournament, it was at the second Fight Club, and we played again, and I specifically remembered that situation. And then I was like, okay, he hit me with it again, but then after that, I never let him commit to that again.
Right. Spacing yourself differently or whatever is necessary to prevent that from happening.
Yeah, I mean, it came down to the way I jumped in. I took a little bit more of a liberty of me dive kicking, and from an adjustment standpoint, you kind of have to make that adjustment when you're playing the same player. You know, you can kind of you may have the same plan all the time, but those minor little adjustments is what, you know, causes both players to kind of grow at the same time.
So you mentioned dive kicks. Would you say that mastering dive kicks outside of like the normal metagame of Third Strike is the hardest part of learning both of the twins?
Not necessarily. Not necessarily, because I know dive kicks are the concept of the dive kick itself. It's like understanding how you need to land it and where you need to land it. It's something that's very difficult for just even some high level players to kind of get right. Again, it comes down to the awareness that you have of where your character is on the screen, what the opponent has, and what they can be capable of doing. It's like if you do something like a max range dive kick against Alex, and you hit him at his knees. There's not much that he can do in terms of a significant punish. The most that he can probably do is like, you know, grab super, probably low short if that, probably standing short if that. I mean, it's very minuscule what he can do,
right?
And it's worth taking that risk. And it's that understanding that's very difficult, but I find that the neutral game with the characters, whether it be Yan, Yang, or anybody in general, you know, the neutral game with the characters is what is the hardest. It's the hardest thing to learn and to get right.
Regardless of character.
Regardless of character, yeah, because if you don't have that understanding of like, okay, I'm just gonna keep on jumping in here, you'll run into things that you'll find that are impossible to deal with. You know, and then that's where people get the misconception that, you know, certain characters are broken, certain characters are hard to beat.
Right.
But it comes down to your playstyle and what you're aware of on the screen.
Knowledge gap is probably the biggest issue in Third Strike. Like, someone playing you that just started is gonna have zero chance. Like, even if they have a very fundamental basic understanding of their choices and what their character can do, and even like basic frame traps or whatever, you know, because the game doesn't function like other fighting games where, you know, frame traps sort of make up a majority of the offensive pressure stuff. Like, it can be very hard for people to acclimate to the system.
Yeah, some particular examples that I like to draw from for that kind of scenario is seeing players go from like Street Fighter 4 to Third Strike, or like go from Street Fighter 5 to Third Strike. You know, everybody makes fun of the fact like, oh, you didn't know that worked, you know, that's a Third Strike thing, or oh, you know, that doesn't work here in this game kind of thing. But the actual thing that you want to see is if this player from Street Fighter 4, you know, if he plays Yang in Street Fighter 4 and then he comes to Third Strike and then he realizes that the moveset is different, but his sort of mental capacity to kind of understand how Yang moves is there, then, you know, he'll have an easier time to kind of adjust to the way that Yang plays, versus if he was just brand new.
Right.
You know, so I feel like any type of experience, despite the game that you come from, will ultimately help you in another.
It's really hard for players that Third Strike is their first fighter.
It is, yeah. Some people, they have a benefit if they've come from different fighting games, but If Third Strike is your first and only game, then it's going to be tough. There's no doubt about it. This is one of the hardest games to learn. And I don't see that. I mean, in my opinion, at least, I don't see that being contested because of just the variance in everything, from the spacing to, how realistic the hitboxes are too.
Right.
It's like in ST, you see a standing fierce. It's like that standing fierce can hit you from like half screen away. But it's like a standing fierce in Third Strike, it might hit you like, realistically in the face.
Right.
But it all depends on how the player that's learning it takes it in stride, pretty much.
Well, when you were new, right, you just started the game, when you were practicing things, like, what did you think were the most important things back then that you needed to learn? And looking back at it, do you think that's still true?
That's actually a good question. I specifically always say that when I first started playing, I always focused on the combos. I would focus on the combos religiously to the point where, if I did a combo 5 times in a row, I would try to go for 10. And then if I messed up, then I would do it all over again. And some people have a hard time doing something like that. Maybe they don't have the patience for it. But I found that committing to something like that, it allowed me to kind of, not mess up my combos when I went into real matches. So the only difference is that you kind of get into bad habits when you do that. So what I kind of want to stress to people now is that when you're first learning, or if you're transitioning to a higher level, you kind of want to put an emphasis on the fundamentals of the game, which is something that I never had. I never really learned the fundamentals until later on.
I mean, that's the same thing for me, right? It's something that, I'm still learning with you over time, is a lot of the fundamental things that this game requires. And, I talk about it all the time where, I was literally just a combo monkey, similar to how, you're talking about that back in the day, all you thought about was combos. That's exactly how I approached Yun, right? I fell in love with the character because I was taught how to do carapoms, and they did 90% of Goku's life. And I was like, oh, this is awesome. I need to do this to everyone.
And I specifically remember those videos back then. Shotokan 1, 2, 3 carapoms. It's like your name was synonymous with carapoms. So it was something that I just saw, and I'm just like, wow, this guy is really good with the carapoms. But yeah, it like if I could go back and tell myself, in terms of learning the game, I would emphasize defense. Because the reason why I say that is take a look at, we can take the Japanese players for example.
Okay.
When they go to an arcade and they learn a new game, they're playing against a computer. They're not playing against human opponents where like they have to block something that's a pattern. It's not like pattern recognition where like, oh, this guy's gonna do an overhead after 2 low shorts.
Right.
No. When they play the computer is doing random things. And you see that if you watch closely when the Japanese players play, that they block the most random normals that otherwise would hit American players.
Right.
Because we're trying so hard to commit to combos that just aren't going to go anywhere.
Or option parry or whatever. We're just doing too much.
Exactly, and it's like, that's why I say like my progression. I first started learning how to do combos. After that, I had a huge issue with guest pairing, and it's like all of that could have been alleviated if I just learned it the right way
from the beginning.
If I learned defense, I would have learned a better neutral. If I learned a better neutral, I wouldn't be guessing, and I wouldn't be put in that position to guess.
So
I would.
Since you created content for this game for a long time, even back then, defense wasn't something that you really pushed, right? It was a lot of character-specific things and like approaches and training mode specific things for specific characters, and there was like one or two videos on like defensive training. So like, how would you tell someone to practice defense, and what are the most important aspects that someone needs to like actually be able to apply? Because practicing defense, as you know, we've come to the conclusion over time trying to get my defense better, is not easy.
Yeah. It is really difficult to learn proper defense, but I think going back to the roots and actually playing against a computer will actually do well. So let's say you're playing against a computer, you literally just try to defend everything.
No parry.
No parrying at all. I mean, you can parry like instant things here, like dive kicks or something like that, like parry and block or something. But in terms of like overheads or normals or specials, don't try to parry anything. And if you are going to parry, try to red parry. Kind of force yourself to learn that stronger defense. Otherwise, you're going to be put into situations where you're not going to know what to do. You're not going to be comfortable because you're not comfortable blocking.
Right.
A lot of people in this game, they have trouble holding down back. Like for me, I had to force myself because I put my hand behind my back, but other people, it's like in their head, they get scared and they think, okay, I can't do anything here. Let me just try to fight back. No, it's okay to block. It's the parrying system kind of spoils us in the sense that we can, parry this, parry that, and get away with it. But we have to be careful because we don't always have that luxury depending on the character that we face.
The other thing is like, specifically, it teaches you to look for openings, right? We all know that the computer has patterns, right? It does specific things, and we know what we can expect. And if you aren't parrying those things, it shows you to really look for, what's negative, going into the whole frame data aspect of things. It shows you to look for the things specifically that can be punished.
Yeah. Not only that, but it's like when we play it against the computer, it's like, yeah, they do have the patterns, but it's how you block against those patterns, because everyone is going to have a pattern.
Right.
So let's say if you're playing against like, let's say if you're playing against, a random opponent, they're going to commit to a specific pattern, whether it be in the corner, in the neutral, or, a specific jump in. And the same could be said about the computer. If the computer does something like that, then it's like you'll know how to defend regardless.
Right.
You won't run into that random normal that just stops you. Just because you want to hit the other guy. I've seen many times where Makoto players, they would do like, they would be stuck in the corner and try to dash up and grab, but then it's like they run into low short from Ken. Right. Why did they run into low short if if they had good defense? You just have to be careful with that. Or some situations where it's like they would dash up and then Ken would do low short and then they would block it, but then the Makoto player would try to press something else and then get hit with a strong fierce.
Right.
So it's that particular scenario where people have to kind of learn to fall back and just say, okay, let me just practice a little bit more defense here, and then everything else will come to me.
And that's another thing, just in general, like if you're blocking in this game, I made an entire video on it, right? Where if you're blocking in this game, it's so much harder to open you up, because very few characters have overheads that lead to any damage of consequence. So it's like, other than throw, it's really hard to deal with. And I mean, like, players like Chris G have amazing throw techs, right? And that's one of like their biggest strengths. So like, if you can block and tech your opponent's throws or see the throw and jump on reaction, like it's really hard to deal with.
Yeah. But at the same time, when you look at someone like Chris G, like his throws are consistent with his reactions.
Right.
So in a sense, a player can be good at teching, but is it because they're reacting to it, or is it because they're guessing and they're just reacting to you moving forward to them?
Right.
So there's a big difference there. So it's like, when I play against Chris G or like Cartola or like other players who just have a tendency to grab on wake up, they're susceptible to the walk back. but then, but then, you know, it's because they're reacting to me walking up and grabbing them.
More so than as a reaction to your throw itself.
More so as just a late tech, you know. And if they did a crouch, you know, a crouch tech, and they did it late, then it's like, okay, I understand that he's trying to tech me right here, right. And it's completely understandable. But some players like Chris G, he'll whiff grab, like if he grabs 10 times in a game, 7 out of those 10 will be him whiffing, because he just thinks that you're approaching him. And people can try it too. If they end up playing Chris G in a third strike tournament, they can just test it out, you know, walk back and forth and see what the opponent does. And that's one of the main things that in the offensive aspect of, you know, progressing to a higher level, that's something that, you know, players should look forward to too. You know, it's how do I force the opponent to do something that I want them to do?
Right, and that's something that I talk about in that video too, is using movement to like limit your opponent's options and make them be forced to make certain decisions.
So, you know, overall, it's something that you know, it's a very big learning curve. You know, it's just like everyone else says. You know, defensive wise and offensive wise, it's very difficult to know exactly what to do, but generally as players, if you can just, you know, kind of hone in on what your weaknesses and your strengths are, you can determine what to do from there.
And it's hard for a lot of people to see what their weaknesses and their strengths are, because either they don't watch back their videos. I mean, forever we didn't have the ability to do so, right? Till there started being replays on Fightcade, or people who would actually like be able to record on their PC or, you know, Xbox with, you know, Dazzle or whatever. You know, that stuff wasn't available to the vast majority of players, and especially in the US, there weren't many places that could record things off of cabinets. So if you were an arcade player, you just sort of had to take your lickings and, you know, go back and think about things and talk to things. And, you know, if you listen to Donka on his podcast with Matt and Frankie, you know, he talks about how a big aspect of getting better at third strike while he was over there was the social aspect afterward, where you can wind down and talk about your matches and all that sort of thing. Is that
the learning phase?
Is that something that you experienced? Like, how much talking about the game with other players did you do, and how much do you think that helped you?
The talking to players, it helped for a time. There was a bunch of times where, you know, after a big tournament or after, you know, a good casual session with other players, you know, we can kind of talk about it, in the sense that, like, not really break down the situation itself, but more like say, okay, this is why I lost. You know, I was getting too aggressive, kind of thing. But the general idea is that it gives you ideas to work on afterwards. It's like whenever I play against a good player, it's like I can figure out why I lost. I know why I lost, but it's a matter of trying to discover the options to get over that, you know. So you know why you lost, but what are some of the other ideas that you have to counter that, to get over that, you know? So it's all based on your character, and all based on you as a player and how much you're going to actually look into it.
Right.
Do you really want to improve as a player to that point? Or if you're just enjoying it, then, you know, you enjoy it. You know, there's nothing wrong with that.
Right. That's something that a lot of people, including myself, don't really consider all that much, is that not everyone plays looking to, you know, get to be as good as they can be. And while a lot of us don't understand why you would play if that's not the goal, you know, other mentalities do exist.
Yeah. Yeah. So it always comes down to, how, it, I like to think that Third Strike comes down to personality,
Right.
how, as a personality, do you have it within you to learn more? And if you don't, then it's okay too. It doesn't matter as long as you enjoy it.
It's also the same with all the characters, right? People say that Third Strike is the game that shows your personality the most, or shows your true personality the most. You might be a reserved player, but you could be a maniac when you're playing.
And that's happened. Yeah.
There's so much variation for every character, regarding are they defensive players, are they offensive players, are they risky players, are they risk averse? Like, all these different ways that every different character in the game can be played. It really boils down to the personality of the player and how they want to use the tools available. And I think the system in Third Strike, like the ability to make reads against your opponent at any given point, whether it's, they're at advantage or disadvantage, or you're at advantage or disadvantage, really helps with that.
Yeah. So, it's just a matter of how you see it, pretty much. Perspective, I like to say.
So you stress defense, right? But is there anything else that you wish that you knew from the get-go? Like, as far as important aspects of the game that either, go undervalued or simply just get glossed over?
I think in terms of game mechanics, understanding the game mechanics it's something that's very overlooked. Some people don't understand how specific punishes work, and some people don't understand that certain punishes do not work.
Can you give some examples?
Like, for example, not necessarily a game mechanic, but in terms of spacing wise, like if I do EX slash and Ken blocks it, but if I slow down the timing on the fourth slash, if I slow down each slash so that the fourth one lands at the furthest point, if Ken does super, it won't hit. The first hit will whiff, and then the second hit I can block.
Right.
But then if I do those four slashes quickly, then I'm going to get hit by it because the recovery is just right there in front of him.
Right.
So it's sort of that understanding, that difference is what some players are lacking, and then some players just don't understand that, when you try to guard jump, there's a certain amount of frames that you have to guard jump,
right.
Or there's a certain amount of frames that you have to parry, and that's why on my stream I try to emphasize the slideshows, because some of those slides are actually beneficial to the players because it's things that they need to know if they want to commit to the better options.
Right. Do you have a like a imager folder or anything like that you've put together for like all of that stuff?
It's on the This Is Third Strike Facebook page.
Okay.
It should be under Set Play, under an album called Set Play, and that's where you can find all these slideshows that I posted and that I have currently on my stream.
Well, when I end up posting this, I'll put that in the description to help people along. Because I know that the parry frame thing, I actually showed that to James Chen, and there was a lot of misunderstandings about parry on Twitter. So like that helped a lot of people. Yeah,
and I saw that there were a couple of discussions of like block stun in like one of the Discord chats, and some information was given that's not accurate, and we kind of have to be careful with that. I mean, if there's something that I post that's inaccurate, I mean, I wouldn't be afraid if somebody called me out on it, and I'll double check it if I have to. So
that's something that sort of plagues our community in general, is that there's so many players that feel they know what's correct or know the right game mechanics or whatever, and they speak on it, and then it's just completely wrong. And a lot of people just take it for what it is. And, it happens on a lot of Discords, and it just goes unchecked. And it's really hard to get the proper information. So, for people having resources like, your slides or whatever, it can be really useful. And unfortunately, outside of your slides, there's not really anything outside of Game Restaurant, the Japanese website, that has all of that information in one place.
Yeah.
So it's really hard for new players to really like dip their toe into the kiddie pool, so to speak, you know, to get all the information they need before they like, you know, go right in and dive off that diving board into the big boy pool.
Yeah. So I think that's just something where, you know, if it's something where we can kind of come together as a group and, you know, collectively make something where we can have accurate information like that, then that would be perfect. But I think so long as the information is received properly, you know, Cartola is one prime example. Like, he looks to give that type of information, and that's something that's really respectful. Yeah, and that's something that's really respectable, because he goes frame by frame, he explains it to that point. There are some inaccuracies, yeah, but practical wise, but overall, you know, he's getting his information directly from the game. It's not like word of mouth and saying, "Oh, I feel like this works,"
right?
Or, "Oh, I think this should work." You know, no, it's like if your experience calls for it to work, then it should work. You know?
Yeah. So, like, throughout your time learning the game, is there anything that you learned, you know, or is there anything that you feel that you've learned that is sort of actually the cherry on top? Like, you know, learning double DP with Ken or double Carapoms with Yun, where it's not like the most important thing, but a lot of players really put a high emphasis on things that sort of are above their pay grade, so to speak, over like the actual meat and potatoes of what needs to be learned. So is there anything outside of those two examples that you feel fits that sort of description?
So, like, what's the prime thing that I learned that set it apart, kind of, or in like in regards to just in general, or in what aspect?
So like just in general, like just things that are overemphasized by the player base as important tools to learn, where in the end, you know, missing that double DP puts you in a very precarious situation against some characters that get up quickly. So is like the way that I tell people to learn Ken, as an example, is to learn single DP and then the follow-ups, and how to mix up the follow-ups, rather than just trying to get the maximum damage possible. Because if you miss that DP, then you don't know the follow-ups to it, you're kind of screwed.
Well, even before that, I mean, we can take it a step beyond that and just say, you know, you don't even need a DP to win a game sometimes.
Right.
You know, but sometimes it's best to just learn the neutral game. Some of the biggest things that are overlooked, like I said before, is just the fundamentals of it all. You know, like the spacing, the awareness of when to jump in, the awareness of, you know, the timing of when to jump in.
Right.
You know, you can jump in at any point and just and you can jump in at any point and just, you know, do an early jump in, but then you'll get hit. You know, but if you do a late jump in, understanding that as a player and why that works, that's something that is really overlooked. You know, and what I want to stress to a lot of people is that, or a lot of players, is, you know, always know what you're going for. Like if you're committing to an action, you have to know why you're doing it.
Right.
You know, as long as if you can say, like, you know, I'm doing it because, you know, I want to hit you, then okay, that's fine. You know, but you can take it a step further and say, okay, but is it the smart decision to take?
Right.
You know, so some people, like for example with Makotos, they like to do, you know, jump medium kick in the corner, and then immediately after they like to use
like light punch into Karakusa or whatever.
No, not even. They like to do jump medium kick and then jump again into Tsurugi or something.
Right.
You know? So things like that can be dealt with, and it's something that has to be addressed as the player. So I think it's a learning curve for everyone.
All right. So you had mentioned that doing something until you get it, or until you do it 10 times in a row or whatever, is something that, should sort of be avoided. Can you clarify that? Because, that's a way that a lot of people actually practice.
I guess to put it into perspective, what I was trying to go for is that the newer players, when you establish everything from, knowing the basics, like how to do a fireball, how to commit to a super, how to, commit to obviously the move list that the game gives you. Yeah, for every character, or at least the character that you're using.
Basic motions and stuff. So once
yeah,
you
of
get
course,
past, like the bare bones things, and once you're working on combos or situational things or whatever.
Yeah. So it's mainly to say that obviously you would need to know the basics regardless, whichever approach you take. Whether you take the approach to practice the combos themselves, or if you take the approach, okay, I want to learn the spacing on all my normals first and proper defense before anything else.
Right.
One of the reasons why I say another thing, I mean, going back to the computer scenario, it's that when you play against the computer, you learn proper defense in the sense that you're not getting hit by anything random.
Right.
That's very crucial when it comes to the learning process, because when you're first starting out, you're kind of taken aback by things that hit you unexpectedly.
Right.
So when it gets to that point where you're playing someone who is, decent or good or above average, someone who knows how to play, they're going to hit you with something and you're not going to know how to deal with it.
I mean, it's something that even like I deal with, and a lot of other, mid to just below strong players deal with, is, you play someone that does something random and you get hit by it and you're just like, why would you do that there? Like, that doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah, I mean, I fall for that too. Honestly speaking, there are times where I just walk up to an opponent expecting them to do crouch tech, and the next thing you know, they like delay their wake up into super or something like that.
Right.
So I'm like, what was that about? There are certain scenarios where that happens, and it's like you're never going to defend against all of them, obviously, but the basic things. So like, if the opponent is pressuring you, at least if you play against the computer and you try to block everything they do, you'll be prepared for that. You'll be prepared to find that opening of, okay, when did he do something risky, like a universal overhead that you blocked?
Right.
How can I punish that? Or if he does shore you on accident, okay, this is my chance. How am I going to punish this properly?
Right.
You would practice that defense when it comes to playing the computer. But then in terms of the combos themselves, obviously you would want to practice that, 5 times over, 10 times over, however long it takes until you commit it to muscle memory.
Right.
The idea is that you don't want to get too combo happy. You don't want to get too too involved with the whole concept of, okay, let me just get my combos off and that's it. There's a lot of attraction when it comes to the combos in this game. So, plus damage wise, just the way that it looks. Urian players are prime examples. The moment that a Urian player discovers tackle headbutt, they want to get it on everyone.
Right.
They want to get it from mid screen rather than in the corner. It's like it doesn't work.
Right.
But it affects everything in terms of your gameplay. So you kind of want to step back from that and just find your opening when it matters, and know the defense when the defense of yourself, so that way you can improve later on. You know what to defend against.
So one thing that I remember that you said was that when people are practicing things, especially when they're, practicing things 10 times in a row to get it right, or to get it right 10 times in a row or whatever, that you said that can build bad habits. So what exactly do you mean by that?
So, for example, from my example, when I first started playing Yun, I always knew the 1-2-3 into Ganajin was the prime Ganajin starter.
Right.
or at least 1-2-3 into shoulder, because that's what everybody was doing. So every chance I got, yeah, like every chance I got, luckily at the time when I started practicing more, online came out. So I remember I started playing. My first opponent was Makuma-zan. He's a Ken player. I'm not sure where he's from, but I still remember to this day. The emulator wasn't fully emulated yet. Like the colors were a little bit off, but people were still able to play.
I remember the first MAME builds.
Yeah, exactly. So it was still in its building phase, but I was just so happy to finally play someone online. And yeah, I was just into that habit because all I had was training mode at that time.
Right.
I didn't really go to offline events, to offline sessions or anything like that at Chinatown Fair. But what I did do was I was able to practice in training mode.
Right.
So the first combo that I saw that was just flat out obvious to me was 1-2-3 shoulder into Ganesian, hop kick, palm, hop kick, palm, up kicks, shoulder, forward fierce, dash punch.
Shoto,
I was like,
101.
Yeah. So I was like, I can get this combo on a Shoto anytime, any day of the week.
Right.
You just give me that opportunity, I will get it. But that's where it lies the problem. Because for me, now when I'm playing an actual opponent, all I'm thinking about is that combo. All I'm thinking about is, okay, let me just dive kick in his face and do 1-2-3 shoulder. And it's like, and I was like so happy when I first got it, but then the second time I tried it, he red parried the shoulder. And I'm like, oh damn, how do I deal with that?
Right.
So it got me into very bad habits in terms of combos. Luckily for me, obviously it raises your skill to the point where you know how to punish things, or at least you know how to, maximize what combo you're going to do, given that it's committed to muscle memory.
Right.
But the problem is that, mentally, because we're all human, we're all creatures of habit, what comes into your mind is what you practiced,
So, to take that a step further, do you think that practicing with save state, whether it's on 360, PS3, or emulation, is one of the better ways to do things? Because I noticed myself when I'm in training mode in 30th or even on 360 and I'm just sort of like doing things, especially as a young player, where I'm practicing like combos or whatever, I don't necessarily know what I'm doing after the fact and why. So like, there will be situations where I'll just like double dive kick afterward just because it's what I'm used to doing. Or there will be like other situations where like I'll dash up in situations where it just doesn't make sense because I'm used to doing that as a way to like start my next combo attempt. Right?
Yeah.
So like that's those sort of habits can be built just by improperly training.
Yeah, and that's what actually I'm referring to, because you already answered it right there, that right after that combo, that's another aspect of it too, because it's also, what do you do after that combo?
Right.
Do you build more meter? Do you dive kick twice?
Do you walk on?
Do you walk up? Exactly. How do you position yourself to counter what the opponent does? You will never be prepared for anything like that until you play actual human opponents. But at the very least, when you play against someone like the computer, you can kind of get certain ideas of, like the spacing, where to position yourself,
right,
to plan out your next move. But then when you play, in the save state and training mode, it's like you have no foundation for that.
Right.
You don't have a plan in your head, and that plan itself is something that's also overlooked from players, majority of players. It's something that I personally stress as well, but that's a bigger discussion. But
right. So like, that can also be said about the double DP thing, right? Where characters are practicing double DP, but they're not practicing single DP into their Okazeme options or their spacing decisions or whatever. So like it's, if you're doing corner situations where you're getting a knockdown, practicing what 3 or 4 options you want to start your game plan with is important. I mean, we'll get into game plans later, but you know, like having that sort of baseline fundamental 3 or 4 decisions that you're going to do afterward and rotating through them, and not in a specific order, mind you, because that can build bad habits as well. But you know, there was a whole video that I made about, you know, using randomization and stuff to like practice that sort of thing. And I still stand by that being a smart choice. But, but only because it helps you curb not building bad habits. Not because it's simply teaching you all of the options that you have, which is a nice side effect. But, you know, just making sure you're not doing the same thing over and over and over again really helps in this game. Because if you're not, you know, doing the same things over and over and over, but you're still committing to a game plan where your opponent has no idea how you're actually going to continue to pressure them, or, you know, if you're going to back away and let them hang themselves, so to speak. You know, there's all sorts of different ways that you can approach every given situation. And if you don't think about those things or practice, you know, if my opponent does this, you know, this is the type of mentality I need to have, it can backfire. But at the same time, you know, it's very time consuming to do things like that. Yeah.
And I personally agree with that training scenario too, where you have a randomizer like that. So you kind of, you know, you have that visual aspect when it comes to practicing, and you can kind of be ready for that when you're playing against actual opponents. Now, the one thing that I kind of noticed it before. I believe it was a post that Jandor made. I think Jandor is an up-and-coming Urian player. He's learning a lot from Dr. Steelhammer, so that's a good sign to see.
Right.
But I believe it was something along the lines of him having trouble, you know, deciding on a couple of options to take. But in general, it's something that I've seen a lot of players have, where they're not too sure what options to commit to, or they just don't have that fundamental knowledge of knowing what to do after a specific situation. So, you know, for example, the randomizer part, you know, let's say you randomize the opponent to do specific things, but then you can't necessarily punish all of them.
Right.
But then in the one that you do punish, you can kind of start developing, you know, the spacing habits from there to determine, okay, what can I do at this point now? You know, you kind of have to take that extra step and think, okay, what am I going to do after this?
Because
you know,
it's like chess, right? Every fighting game, you have to think 3 or 4 moves in advance. Because
you have to calculate. Yeah.
If you don't calculate your decisions, then, you know, it's going to come back to bite you in the ass. So I mean,
and
go ahead.
Yeah, and you know, to your point, that's exactly what it is, because a lot of players just have trouble calculating that just in general, you know, and there's nothing wrong with that because it happens to everyone. I mean, even at the highest level, it's hard to calculate, you know, as far ahead as you would like to. You know, the most that the top level would like to calculate ahead is more like at least a round.
Or a round? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, obviously the round is further ahead than just 2 or 3 decisions, but you know, you kind of base off your decisions based on like how much meter the opponent has, life, if you're up around, if you're up a game, you know, even in team tournaments, you know, it's based off of how many other players do they have.
Right.
You know, can I take this extra risk? You know, so it's that type of calculation that's hard to do. But then once you simplify it to, you know, the character matchup, you know, yourself as a player and how you adjust, all that kind of that weight gets lifted off your shoulders once you develop that confidence.
I think it's also important to understand, especially as a new player, that like delving into these secondary choices is very important because it teaches you a lot about the game, and it makes you think about things that you might not normally think about. But however, if you are like myself and you overcomplicate things and you think too far in advance, or you try to consider every single option that your opponent has, you can overwhelm yourself very easily. And that was one of my issues for a long time, and it still can be an issue when I'm under stress, right? I'll revert back to that sort of, oh crap, I have to think about all of these different things. Instead, in reality, I don't. I just have to think about 4 things. Are they going high? Are they going low? Or are they going to delay their decision or jump? That's pretty much it. Depending on your spacing and stuff, right?
Yeah.
So, like, that other thing goes back to the video that I made talking about, positioning and movement and all that stuff, and how that affects every sort of knockdown situation, basically every situation in the game, right? Everything changes based on where you are. So either you take choices away, or you sort of leave them there. And I do apologize for anyone if you can hear thunder in the background, because it's deciding to be a thunderstorm. But anyway, hopefully that's not too bad. So I think that's a good segue into this sort of a question, is like, when you play, do you play by feel, or are you like super analytical, or do you like to do both? Because from what you're saying, it's very important to both play by feel, right? You have to play by the situations and what you think and all that stuff, but you also have to analyze your choices so that, Frankie just had a podcast with Damdai, and they talked about flow state, right? Where the more that you have just as muscle memory, and the more that you have built into your, database in your head, so to speak, of all of your choices in a given situation, that you can, sort of flip the pages through and choose one at random, that allows your flow state to sort of, continue a lot more easy, because you don't have to think about your decisions. They just sort of, okay, this is the situation, I know these are good decisions, go.
Exactly. And I personally agree with that, because in a sense, that's actually how players get their win streaks. That's how players, when they go to the arcade, that's how they get those 20-game win streaks, 30-game win streaks, 100-game win streaks.
Right.
Because their instinctual decisions that they're making, they're just correct. They're just correct for that day. It's like, for example, when we had the Japanese players, we had Yakun, Kokujin, RX, and Issei come over. My personal example is, like, when I'm playing against them, they always say, oh, you play just like KO, you play just like KO, this and that. But, obviously there are decisions that he makes that I don't. And, there's a reason why he's, far better than I am.
Right.
To hear a story from them, for them to say that, when KO was practicing with them, that when KO was practicing with them, that he beat them consistently. Like, it was like almost like 10 set streaks kind of thing, like maybe that
they're always playing catch up.
Yeah, it was like a little bit of an exaggeration possibly, but the fact is that he beat them significantly more than what they could even attempt to.
Right.
And they were just saying that, that he's just way too strong like that. But then I play in Japan, and it's like, I play against Issei, and then I lose to him, and I'm like, Issei, how does what is the difference? What is the difference between, like, what KO is doing versus what I'm doing? Everybody says that we play the same way. Everybody says that we're playing pretty similar, but what is it that he's doing that I'm missing? And he's just like, no, you guys do play the same or similar. He, like, the way that he reacts towards things is a little bit different. He's used to just reacting to everything. In terms of jumps, for jumps, he'll immediately react with the jump anti-air. Whereas for me, I'm kind of trying to, because of online habits, unfortunately, I'm so used to trying to expect what's coming afterwards. So I'll kind of expect the opponent to jump, and I would jump out, but then I would get hit afterwards.
Right.
So it was a bad habit on my part, but the fact is that, I asked him, I was like, so does KO always win like that? And he said, was like, no, like there are days where, it happens the same way to KO, where I would beat him the same way. And at that point, I kind of took it in stride, and I was like, okay, now I kind of understand it better, because in a sense, that flow state, it's what it's what kind of culminates into everything on that day. That's why I kind of got off the whole idea of there being a best player in this game,
Right.
because there never is really a best player. There can be a consistent player. There can be, someone who wins a tournament, the past 3 years, but then they would lose like 10 games straight in casuals the next day. So it's it's mainly all about how that person is feeling on that day, and that's why that flow state is very important in this game, because everything comes into play, from your execution to your game plan to the character matchups that you're comfortable with, everything.
Right.
And once you get all of that into the instinctual aspect of you playing, then that's why there's that momentum. That's why players like Deshi can go on such a run, because he just has that flow state. He knows how to react to certain things.
He knows his game plan, and he knows how to adapt it.
Exactly. Yeah.
So, like, do you think that having that ability is analytical, or do you think that, like, it's playing by feel? Like,
so going back to that original question of, do I play by feel or do I play by analytics? When I first started, I used to play by feel.
Okay.
I used to think, okay, this might work, because the hitboxes in Third Strike, they're pretty accurate.
Right.
They're pretty accurate to what the animation you're seeing.
Unlike other games.
Unlike other games, exactly. It's like, if Chun-Li presses Standing Fierce, you're getting hit by the Standing Fierce if her fist is in your face,
Yeah.
But chances are nothing above that, or nothing ahead of that. But it's just that's why it's okay to sort of play with a feel when you first start. But if you want to progress, it's another aspect of that, gaining that extra level,
Right.
to your gameplay. You have to understand, okay, at the end of the day, this is a game that's built on frames, 60 frames per second, 60 frames per second, sorry. And depending on what you do, you're either negative or positive. So you kind of have to understand, in what position are you able to be punished, So a lot of people would try to think that universal overhead point blank is safe if the opponent blocks, and it's not. It's most definitely not.
Right. You're at least negative a little bit. So, I mean, like, if you press something, you're probably going to lose. And, I mean, that's the other thing is, like, when we talk about frame data, right, there's games like Tekken. And Tekken has, like, 50 characters. So not only do you have to memorize the frame data of all the moves, all of your punishes for each type of negative, like negative 10, negative 12, etc., but you have to memorize where you can duck in their strings. You have to memorize a hell of a lot more than you have to do for Third Strike, which only has, 18, 19 characters, and their moveset is very small by comparison, right? Maybe not as far as the practical aspect of what actually gets used in Tekken, but there's definitely a lot less that needs to be done. So, how do you learn the best? Like, what do you learn from the most? Like, videos, your time in training mode, actually playing the game against players? Like, everyone learns differently, and everyone has a focus that helps them the most. What is it for you?
I guess predominantly watching videos, whether it be of myself or other players. You kind of take that time to dissect what's going on in the match, and any decisions that you faced, or rather decisions that you might come across.
Right.
You'll be ready for it the next time. So there are specific situations where, like, I try to figure out why certain Makoto players dash under me and then command grab. How is that happening? And then I watch other players. I'd watch obviously KO play, and he would just constantly jump. He doesn't care if he gets anti-hit or not. I mean, obviously he will buff for parry, but he'll constantly jump so he avoids that. I mean, you're not always going to avoid it, but it's just a situation that you can keep in your head and say, you know what, I'll keep a note on this for next time. Right. But generally, you tend to take everything into account. So, the matches that you play against, you would have to know what your weaknesses are. The match videos that you watch, or just matches that you watch in general, those are experience based.
Right.
So if you see something in a match video or in a tournament match that you've never seen before, then you can probably say, oh, okay, that's pretty cool. Now I know that exists.
Right.
And then on top of that, in tournament matches, you can probably figure out, okay, which normals are the players using in this particular matchup. For Yang versus Dudley, I specifically saw Crouch Fierce as a good anti-air. I saw some Yang players I saw standing forward, some standing fierce, far standing fierce, and then others close standing fierce. And some others they even just jump forward and they anti-air like that. But it's it's all based on the experience. The more experience you get, whether it be by playing or watching, it's helpful.
Right.
It's helpful. So now the analytical part where it's like you study frames, you kind of understand why it works. So one prime example that I like to use is the slashes with Yang.
Right.
So light punch slash is -1. Right? Yeah, it's -1 on all the characters except Ryu-chan and Q. Now, the whole idea of that is that you can probably determine what you can press after that.
Right.
So since it's -1, when you understand the negative, like the block stun frames and the startup frames, you can pretty much get a good grasp of what works and what doesn't. So if a move is, -7, obviously anything with a startup of less than -7 will punish it.
Right.
Given that it's within the space. So it's all a matter of how you take the information and dissect it. There are some characters like Urian who, you can't necessarily do that with. You can't necessarily take the frame data and figure out which to punish overall.
Right.
Because his general punishes are very, very general in the sense that, it's either standing strong EX headbutt or crouch fierce into whatever combo it is. So depending on the character, he might make that decision based on, what's given to him.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, it's all, you want to take every single experience that you get and learn from it, no matter how big or small.
But so from what you're explaining though, is that to get the most out of watching games, whether it's your own or high-level players, is you have to already have enough of a knowledge base so that it can actually help you. So you have to be like a upper mid-level player to get the most out of it. While there are still some redeeming factors to watching it as a lower level player, it's going to be significantly worse to do so, the less information that you already have.
Not necessarily the worse. It's not going to be necessarily worse for the lower level player because for me, if at a certain point, I'm watching these other top players do specific specific setups or combos or things like that, and you immediately have to ask yourself the question, as a lower level player, you have to ask yourself the question, okay, this works, it works, but you have to understand why it works.
Right.
Some players, they might just look at it and say, okay, this works, so let me try it, and then they consistently do it, and then as a feel type of position, they might think, okay, this character's probably too far, so it's probably why it doesn't work. But in reality, the higher level you go, you'll probably say, okay, this is like -10, so if he tries to do anything aside from a direct punish, it won't work.
Right.
You know, it progresses the more you experience as a player. So
basically, the things that you're looking for depend on your skill level.
Yeah, but at the same time, it also depends on your experience, because let's say you, for example, let's say you're well, I'll just use Yang as an example. Let's say you're a Yang player and you're struggling against Akuma's demon flips. You may not think of anything otherwise, but if you just watch a match video and you see if you see the Akuma player doing a demon flip every single situation, but then that Yang player does a drill kick to counter it, you know, you might just immediately take that and say, okay, well, that works, so let me just try it, without necessarily understanding why it works.
Right.
You know, so from there, the lower level player will think, okay, this works, I'm going to consistently use it, and now Akumas can't do demon flips. All right, good job. Now I don't have to worry about it anymore. That's one situation I completely got over, and I can move on to the next one. You know, that's your experience building right there.
Right.
But then, as you start to learn more about the game, you'll start to realize, man, this drill kick actually has a low hitbox on the ground. Oh, okay, so that's why it works when it comes to the demon flips. Now that's why it works when it comes to jump-ins, or avoiding like the high attack jump-ins.
Right.
You know, so it starts to progress from there. You start to realize, okay, this is really good, and then you start to look at the frames. Okay, how much startup do I have? You know, is it 7 frame startup? I'm just you know, throwing out numbers, but you know, is it 7 frame startup? Is it 8 frame startup? You know, and as you progress as a player, you'll start to realize that that one single option that you felt as a lower level player, you know, why it worked, you start to discover, you know, the fundamentals of it, you know, how the game works, you know, the frame data behind it, and the mechanics of, you know, why does it work as a counter to a high jump-in attack? Right. Why? Because Yang's hitbox gets lower as the move comes out, and the hitbox hits the character as he rises. So it's a dual effect.
Similarly, you know, like you'll watch games and you'll see like players with normals in specific situations, like Dudley. Like if he jumps over his opponent, a lot of Dudleys in Japan will do jumping heavy punch to get themselves off the ground, so that if they get hit, it just puts them in a reset position and pushes them further away, right?
Yeah.
Which is something that, you know, not a lot of non-Japanese Dudleys do. You know, Sherwin actually does it a lot. So does it sometimes, but like not consistently for a majority of other Dudleys, right? But going back to that demon flip example, so what you're saying is that if there's an issue that you know that you're having, like let's say demon flip, you would go and you would specifically watch Goki matches to see if that situation comes up and how it's dealt with, right?
Yeah, like let's say if you know, it depends on the kind of player you are. Like for me, I'm all around. I can go into training mode, watch videos, practice in matches, whatever. So in a sense, if you're the type of player that plays based on feel, then try to look up a match video and just see what they do. You know, try to get an example of, you know, how do they deal with it? Do they jump back? Do they do drill kicks? Do they walk under? You know, do they try to parry it and then jump out? You know, there are specific options that they can probably do, but if you're the more analytical player, you might go into training mode and just try it consistently, try different options consistently, you know, just by replicating it over and over and over and learning to punish. And all these little examples culminate into you progressing as a player. So if you know, at this point, if you're really questioning why you're losing to a specific thing, chances are you're an average to above average player, and you're starting to realize, like, okay, let me try to figure out what exactly is troubling me. So you would take that one situation, and then go from there. You know, go into training mode, go into a match video, try to work with another player. At certain points, it gets to a point where you can just say, you know, to the player that's beating you, you know, I really don't know why I'm losing to you. And there's nothing wrong with that. You know, I've had to swallow my pride a lot of times and just say, you know, to throw a name out there, a therapist, you know, the Akuma player from Pennsylvania, but
yeah,
from Boston. Yeah, and I remember I had a long streak where I lost against him, and I'm like, I don't know why I'm losing to you. You know, I mean, not to say that, you know, he was a bad player or anything, but it's like, I lost 20 games straight to him one time.
right.
And I'm like, I just do not understand why I'm losing. You know? And then he immediately brought it up to me. He was like, you know, your offense is putting me in a position to get hit. You know, so it was a very generalistic, you know, comment.
Mm-hmm.
But in a sense, if you look at the grand scheme of it, he's right, because in my attempt to be aggressive, I was dive kicking in his face. I was dive kicking from full screen, and he would either parry the dive kick or he would super with Akuma.
Right.
And it's like, if you full screen dive kick and then Akuma supers, you're not escaping it.
No.
You're gonna take all of that damage, and it's just another situation where it's gonna come in again. And yeah, he's that one little comment just, you know, struck me and was like, okay, you know what? Let me not try to play the same way.
Right.
So then immediately what happened is that, you know, as a real life example, I took that advice, I went into training mode, and then I tried to figure out, okay, how do I deal with this? There has to be a way to deal with this particular setup. So I specifically replicated low forward into demon flip.
Right.
And I'm just like, okay, what can I do against this? You know, now's the time. Sit down, take 10, 15 minutes. What exactly can Yang do to punish this? Can he parry and then punish? Can he jump back? Can he drill kicks? Can he teleport? You know, what does your character have to counter that?
Right.
So then immediately the next time I played him in tournament, I ended up beating him. And then I won that tournament because of the fact that I took that advice and I was like, okay, let me figure out how to beat this.
Right.
And then at that point, he didn't know what to do.
But I mean, like,
or he struggled.
The sort of thing to go into training mode and, you know, figure these things out is a skill that either a lot of players don't cultivate or they're just too lazy, right? Let's be honest.
Yeah, of course.
But, you know, one of the things that bothers me in particular is there are situations that I'll have issues with and I'll go to look for an answer. And because that situation never comes up, because both players know the situation in and out and they know it's not a good situation for either player, or, you know, one person doesn't want to do that because they get hard punished in a specific way, but I still don't know how to deal with it, or, you know, XYZ player still doesn't know how to deal with it. It then comes down to you to go and figure out the answer, as opposed to being able to watch a video and figure out the answer, because if that situation never comes up and you can't see an answer that person uses to get out of that situation, then you're kind of at a loss, right?
Yeah. I mean, you know, obviously the laziness comes into play, of course, but it's all a matter of mindset at that point.
Right.
You know, all these points that we're referring to in terms of the training mode to practicing to, you know, the mindset of progressing as a player to even, you know, the mindset of, okay, do I really want to learn this? You know, I mean, it's okay to kind of reach a specific level and just say, okay, you know what, I'm comfortable here.
Right.
Although if you do have aspirations to become a stronger player, a better player, if you want to improve, then by all means, you take that extra step and you improve.
Right.
You know, don't expect that, you know, you're just going to sit there, twiddle your thumbs, and then the skill is going to come overnight.
Or just,
you know, you have
over and over and over again and not really, you know, learn from mistakes and not really come and, you know, dissect what went wrong, whether you're watching your own matches or not, to do so. So, like, when you watch your own matches, though, like, what do you look for in particular? Are you looking for, like, damage swings? Are you looking for, like, knockdown situations? Like, how do you diagnose what your bad habits are?
So for me, I watch, well, first to clarify, I watch both my wins and my losses.
Right. That's important.
Yeah, it's very important to make that distinction because a lot of people, they think like, okay, I'm just gonna watch all of my wins and that's it. I'm gonna give myself that confidence to say, okay, I won this match like clean. But then,
in the same regard, a lot of people only think about watching their losses so they can learn from
exactly.
But if you don't watch your wins as well, then you can't be confident in your choices.
Exactly, and it's like, if you watch your losses, you might think, damn, this is really tough to watch because that's you on the screen. That's you losing on the screen. Mentally as players, we're susceptible to that mindset of, okay, winning and losing. We're going to think, shit, why did I lose here?
Right.
And I don't want to look at this and watch my lose. Like, no. But if you really care about, progressing as a player, and this is actually something that applies to anything, and you could apply this to real life. I mean, if you fail at something in real life, you kind of don't want to face it. But then if you want to improve on yourself, you have to face it. You have to do what you can to improve.
Right.
So as much as, I do watch my wins to see what worked. It's from a competitive standpoint, you have to understand what works against certain players, how you played that day. Because let's say last week I entered a tournament and I struggled against Frankie, but then I ultimately won.
Okay.
But then when I play Frankie in casuals, he ends up destroying me like 10-0 or something like that.
Okay. Yep.
I would take the time to say, damn, what the hell happened? Me and him used to go back and forth. Why is he beating me like this? I would go back to that tournament match and see, okay, what worked here that's not working now? And then I would try to go even further back and say, okay, what worked here? What worked here against him that is not working now? And then if I still can't figure something out, then I would probably look towards KO playing against Frankie or other players playing against Frankie. Just try to get some other ideas to be creative and just say, okay, me playing solid will not work, but me playing a little bit more aggressive might shift it in my favor, and then from there I can implement my own personal game plan.
Right.
And that's the next step.
So players nowadays are going to be spoiled, right? Especially if Fightcade 2 continues its, progress in making the emulation better and, making everything more accessible and all that stuff, right? You have the replays online. And, there's no excuse for Fightcade players to not be able to, or not be willing to really watch their matches. They're all there, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
exactly.
When you were coming up, though, there was no real way, unless you really invested in it, like getting a Dazzle and a, VCR and all sorts of stuff if you're playing online on like the original Xbox or whatever. Because, I mean, that's something that I did. Even though it wasn't specifically to watch my matches to get better, I just wanted to record things. And we had to jump through a lot of hoops to do so. But, I assume that you didn't do a lot of that stuff in the early days when you were learning. So, because you...
Actually, on the contrary, I did.
You did? Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah, to clarify on that just a little bit, as a player, I knew that I wanted to be one of the best players, if not the best player. Obviously, that's a moot point now, but it's that drive to get better.
Mm-hmm.
It's what pushed me to kind of, you kind of have to have a goal.
Right. And you know, the extra steps.
Yeah, you need that goal to push you to do what you want to do. So, let's say if I'm an up and coming Urian player, and there are a lot of up and coming Urian players, which I'm very pleased to see.
Right. Mostly thanks to Mr. Steel or Dr. Steelhammer.
Yes, who transitioned from a Yun, but let's not speak on that. But no, but seriously, it's one of the reasons why I developed videos in the first place.
Right.
Because when I first started playing, I just had a camcorder and I'm just in like a regular camera, and I'm just like, okay, I really want to see how I play against this other player. So I would record my matches, and to this day, I specifically keep those matches up on my YouTube channel. Me playing against the computer, me playing against players online on Clear, me playing against players on 2DF, on P2P, on anything, online tournaments. I specifically recorded all of those matches, so I can, if I lose, I take a look back on it and I say, okay, why did I lose here?
And over time, it allows you to, show your progression, show what you looked like in the beginning. So for the newer players, they can go back and be like, wow, when Lloyd started, he really sucked. And now, and now you can look at you now, right?
Exactly, and that's something that I really want to instill in all the players, is that it's okay to kind of just play against the computer and embarrass yourself. I mean, for me, when I first started, I remember I had a Daigo Parry video, and then I was like, okay, let me try to do this against the computer. So then I literally did it against the computer, and I posted it, and it's like, it got so many views. And I'm just like, wow, that's pretty cool. But the next thing you know, I remember one person actually tried to copy it. He actually took the video, posted it on his channel, and made it seem like it was him. And at that point, I was like, wow, are you serious? People actually do that? But the fact was that, the whole concept of it was for me to learn as a player. So I took that and I was like, okay, let me go from here. So now once Kylera came out, I was like, okay, let me watch me play against this guy. Not only will it give me the confidence if I win, but at the same time, if I lose, I can figure out, okay, why did I lose?
Right.
And that's why I sincerely encourage everybody, if you're looking to progress as a player, do not be afraid to stream your matches. Do not be afraid to record your matches and post them, or just say, hey, guys, this is me playing. I may not be the best, but this is it. Any advice that you guys can give me is more than welcome.
Right.
And if you remember, Collins, that's how we used to do it back in the Shoryuken days.
Right.
People used to post things like that all the time, and people used to comment on it.
Whether it was good or completely crapping on people.
yeah. I mean, whether it was good or bad, people still commented on it, and that feedback. You need that feedback to progress.
So especially in like the early days, like what was your approach to learning from your mistakes, right? Like what did you look for in those replays?
In those replays, I kind of based it off of what I did offensively.
Right.
Because my defense was terrible back then. I never really focused on my defense until later on. Like I stated earlier.
I feel attacked.
Huh?
I said I feel attacked.
No, but so again, I tried to find so much of a variance in my offense that I neglected my defense.
Right.
So when I first started playing, I was like, okay, was this the best combo to do here? Was this the best combo to do here? Was this the best setup? And it got to the point where I started playing in online matches. I started recording them, and then I started to realize why I lost. And then immediately after, I finally started to kind of look deeper into that. And then that's when I realized, damn, I'm focusing on the wrong thing. I have to really focus on my defense now. And then that's what happened. I started moving to my defense, and then everything else started falling into place, like, character knowledge, game knowledge, matchup knowledge, player knowledge. All these things started to culminate into who I am as a player now.
Right.
And that's all built on the foundation that I had before. But you need to have the right sort of, not support system in a sense, but you need to have the right mindset, and you need to have the right conditions in the sense that you need the competition around you. Otherwise, you look for that competition.
And that's something that, if the online version of the game continues to flourish, it'll be a lot easier to find people around your own skill level. Because, as we've talked about before, like, finding people and playing people that are your own skill level, below you, above you, they all give you different bits of information, help you with confidence, whatever. And it can really help every type of player from every skill level to improve by, trying to play all different types of players and figuring out what they can get from each of those things. So, like, if these players are watching their replays against top players, or they're watching their replays against people of their own skill level or whatever, what are some tips that you have for self-assessment when watching these for the newer players that are just starting to get into watching their own videos? Like, if you had to give a couple things for these players to focus on just to, like, get the ball rolling on their improvement, what would you say?
So if let's say a lower level to average player is playing against a top player or a higher level player,
yep.
Some specific points, matchup knowledge. The matchup knowledge in general is what builds our game plans. The game plans we can get into, after this, but generally matchups are things that work specifically for that character against the opposing character.
Right.
So Crouching Fierce as an anti-air with Yang works really well against, like, the bigger characters like Alex, Dudley, sometimes Urian, sometimes Ibuki even. But it's not really going to work against Ken or the Shotos or maybe even Makoto. It just does not work simply because of the fact that you're going to take a lot of damage because of the way that their jump in is.
Right.
So it's very important for players at least the average level to start learning the matchup knowledge. Start learning the matchups, as in, what normals can I press here? What situations can I anti-air here, and against which character? Everyone has a general concept of what their normals are. As Urian players, if you're playing against a Hugo, you know that Sword Strong is good. Standing strong into Fireball is good as anti-airs. Standing strong into EX Headbutt is good. Even jump back Fierce or jump back Strong, things like that. There are so many other ideas that you can get that you as a player have to focus on.
Right.
So work on those matchups, and then immediately after that, your style will come into play based on that.
Right. So, before we jump into game plans, what do you think is most important about, like, the type of games that you watch? Like, we've had conversations in the past where we talk about the idea of watching a particular player that most similarly either plays like you or plays in a way that you deem like your goal play style. Like, do you think that that's, more important than overall watching everything? Because, I mean, at this point, we're spoiled compared to you. Like, when we've had conversations where you talk about watching one KO match in one matchup 20 times in a row because that's all you had. But now, we have things like my database or spreadsheet or whatever that have like 600 games of Yun versus Chun. So it's everybody knows about the Shen now. Yeah, and the Shen and all that stuff too, right? So like, there's so much information now, like, that the newer players are, pretty spoiled by comparison. So since there's so much information, like, how would you begin to look at all that stuff?
So one specific way to narrow it down would be to watch tournament matches. And I say tournament matches in terms of, the high level top player tournament matches.
Right.
And obviously it's not because, I want everybody to just be, only focus on the top players, but there are specific things that they do in matchups where you won't see that in any other gameplay. You won't see that in the average matches. You won't see that in the lower level matches. You won't gain that understanding. So in terms of improvement, you want to, for example, in my case, I looked at that one match with KO's Yang versus an Elena, and I'm like, okay, let me kind of play on this and see what I can do. So then I use that, and lo and behold, it works.
Right.
You know, there are certain things like, you know, when Elena does the back roundhouse, I can just slash that. I don't need to press anything afterwards, or I can just simply delay my moves. So I can do like, you know, low short, walk up grab, and then the next situation, low short, and then they do back roundhouse. I'll slash from there, and it'll hit them. You know, so little things like that will make the difference. It's more so with other matches. So like, say if you're a Urian player, you have RX as an example. You know, he is the prime player to look for, to say, okay, he knows what to do in certain matchups. I mean, the reason why I say that is because he's very solid.
Right.
You know, he's not really as combo heavy as people think. He's very solid with the normals that he uses. He's very solid and, you know, quite frankly, turtle-ish a little bit. So in general, you can kind of narrow it down. You're not being blinded by all the combos and everything like that. You're kind of really focusing on the neutral game.
Right.
And that's what's most important when it comes to watching videos like that. If you just have that one video, you just watch that neutral game, see what they do, and there's always going to be that one specific thing that will stand out. There will have to be.
Right.
You know?
One sort of catalyst to their winning the matchup.
Yeah, and that's something that is from the actual matchup itself. So, you know, you're not going to see that with any of the matchups except for that one. Or you might, but it's more specified in that matchup, and that's why I try to emphasize to do that. You know, rather than cloud your mind with like so many other matchups, so many other matches at the same time, you focus on one, break it down point for point, and then take it from there. Try to see what you can pull from that, you know?
And then how you can play it and all that stuff.
Exactly. It's like if you have your own car and then you have another car on the side, you kind of want to see how you can make your own car better. You know, you want to break down that other car to see what parts you can take, apply to your own, and then just, you know, make your own car better.
Right.
You know, it's similar aspect pretty much.
And also, you know, they might approach it from a more basic baseline matchup perspective because it's single game as opposed to, you know, doing things in casuals or casuals or a set or whatever, because like as we know, sets of games require constant adaptations, where sometimes in a single game or 2 out of 3, 2 or 3 adaptations is all you need to win.
Mm-hmm. And one thing that I don't necessarily like about watching sets or playing sets in order to learn is that after like the first 2 or 3 games, it's not a matchup anymore. It's a matchup of the players rather than the characters. Yeah. It's more of a matchup of the players rather than the characters. So, you know, players can do the same 3 different options all the time, but in terms of matchups, you know, you want to have that one game to see, okay, what does this player do to kind of stop this, you know, this game plan that the other player has.
Right. And I guess for the single game or, you know, 2 out of 3 or whatever, it's a lot easier to focus on what their actual game plan is rather than, you know, over time what the game plan is, because as you said, you know, you have to adapt a lot faster and, you know, make different changes and all that stuff. So it's no longer about the matchup itself. It's about doing what's necessary in the matchup as a baseline and then changing it to your opponent and their style and stuff over that, whatever it is, first to 10, first to 5, etc.
Exactly.
So we just talked about, you know, how to assess yourself, right? And we've also talked about how, you know, you really like to use videos. So what kind of training do you actually do now? You know, is it mostly just watching videos and then trying to like either emulate or make things that you see your own? Or is it like using training mode to specifically learn like new things, practice execution, whatever? At this point,
well, I guess at this point where I'm at now.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, it kind of progressed from, you know, obviously I spoke about the combos part and the specific situations part, and when I got to the higher level, it was more of like trying to get used to the red parries.
Okay.
Red parrying in specific situations. So just the basics. So with Ken, I would try to red parry all of his setups. So like low, short, 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 low, short, jab, short, strong, fierce, back, medium kick, and his super. And the reason why I specifically do it for Ken is pretty much because for everyone else it's pretty similar in the sense that when you're trying to red parry something, it's just that particular timing. You know, it's like the short jab short. It's similar to 1-2-3 from Yun.
Right.
You know, so it kind of gives you that feel of, okay, I feel more comfortable trying to red parry this particular moveset, and you can take that to other characters. So for me, when I started, well, in my transition to the higher level, I mainly focused on the red parries. I try to focus on red parrying specific things from characters that were very prominent. So, as I said, the 1-2-3 from Yun, low forward slash from Yang, Chun-Li's back fierce into fireball. That's pretty crucial.
Stuff like Alex's EX elbow slash.
EX elbow slash, yeah, that's a difficult timing one, but you would definitely want to practice that one. Ibuki's standing medium kick into Samuji, her quarter circle
back kick,
right? Yeah. Her normal version though, not the EX version. The reason why is because EX, it's very difficult to red parry that consistently. So I kind of got used to red parrying the second hit, which
Samuji.
Of the Samuji, yeah, and it's predominant.
You kind of have to, right? Because if you do it too early, then you just get hit by Raida.
Exactly. It's like it's one of those situations where it's there's no reason not to, kind of. And that's one thing that I started to learn from too, is that there are certain things in the game that when you commit to a red parry, there's nothing wrong with just committing to it in general. So what that means is that with 1-2-3, you kind of have to be careful with red parrying it because it leads into Ganesian, right. You know, from Yun. But let's say if you're confident enough or quick enough to block the back medium kick from Ken.
Mm-hmm.
The back medium kick doesn't lead into anything if you're standing, right? So there's absolutely no reason for you not to attempt the red parry, because at worst case scenario, the only thing that you get hit by is one hit of the back medium kick. But at best case, you get a proper punish because you get a full punish after the red parry.
Right.
So with that in mind, it's like a situation like that, there's no reason not to. So in a similar sense with Ibuki, when she does the standing forward into Samuji, the second hit, there's no reason not to red parry that. You know, it's just free pressure for her. Mm-hmm.
Can't the third hit knock you down?
The third hit can knock you down, but it's not significant damage. It's like if Ken hits you with the back medium kick, that's a full super.
Right.
You know, if you're crouching. If Yun hits you with the last hit of strong after the 1-2-3, that's a full Ganesian combo. Those are significant punishes that
there's a risk.
You know, there's a major risk. You know, with Chun-Li, the back fierce fireball, absolutely no reason not to parry that, because if she back fierces and then fireballs and then does super, the red parry won't come out because the super flash stops you from committing to that. But then if she just normally does the back fierce into fireball, you're relatively safe because there's nothing coming afterwards.
Right.
You know, so there are those particular situations when you go into training mode and you practice red parrying. Once you get to that level, that you start to realize, okay, there's no risk in this. There's hardly any risk in this. But let me work on the more sophisticated ones. So, or at least sophisticated, but the more common ones. So, you know, the standing medium kick Samuji from Ibuki, back medium kick from Ken, sometimes you can try to red parry Dudley's 1-2-3. But that's a little bit tricky. Let's see.
So, is it only
sorry.
red parries that you look for, or is it like situations where you know that you get a free parry? Like after Dudley short, where you know, like you get a free forward parry because if he goes for sweep, you can block it.
It's more of like it's more both, because with the red parrying, you kind of take that extra step to learn how to punish things accordingly. You know, you're not satisfied with the regular punishes that you're getting. You kind of, when you're committing to just the regular Street Fighter basic punishes, you have to wait until your opponent whiffs a normal, until your opponent whiffs a Shoryu, or, you know, messes up a super and you block the whole thing. It's like, with the red parrying in the game, you get more of a leeway to punish things that were otherwise you couldn't punish.
Right.
You know, so it kind of shows you that you can take that extra step, take advantage of the game mechanics, and say, okay, you know what, the game allows me to red parry, so why not go for it? There are specific situations where obviously you can't, like I said, the 1-2-3. But the whole concept of it is that you look for those situations first in training mode. You know, you just practice your red parry. Maybe it's like a cool thing, you know? Maybe you wake up one day and you watch a video and you're like, oh, that's a cool red parry, let me try that.
Right.
You know, and then it's like, oh wait, but this red parry can actually lead into something bigger. And then you look for a full punish. You know, and then from there, it's like you take it into the actual gameplay, and now the opponent is scared, you know, it's scared out of their mind to try to do a back fierce fireball, or to do the standing mini kick Samuji.
Right.
You know, so, or even for Yuns, if you're consistently getting the 1-2-3, I mean, you can probably attest to this, but there are many times where I would red parry the 1-2-3, and then a mix-up with that would be 1-2, and then low forward.
Kick, or, you know, delay something, or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, even Sho, he knows that players like to red parry, so he does 1-2-3, like he does it really slow.
Right.
And, you know, it's just a variance in that, and that's what elevates you to the higher level as a player, because you start to say, oh shit, you know, oh damn, my red parry isn't working.
Right.
So let me try to come up with a different answer. And that's where the higher level comes into play. So there's that red parry aspect, and then there's the punishing aspect of it all. And that's the training that I started to transition to when I got to the higher level.
Right.
But now where I'm at now, I kind of negated all of that now, because now I'm just comfortable red parrying everything in the middle of a match.
Right.
Whether I have the timing down or not, I just attempt it. And it kind of builds into your game instinctually at that point. You know, you don't have to think about it or practice it. You just say, oh, okay, my timing's a little bit off, you know, and then let me just adjust it. But now it's more of like the play style concept. Once you get to the top level, it's more about the play style. You know, so for me, when I played Makotos in Japan, I beat a lot of Makotos that were, you know, pretty mellow. You know, they weren't really overly aggressive. But at the same time, some of the ones that were extremely aggressive were a little bit difficult to beat. So that difference in playstyle, me dealing with the mellow ones versus me unable to deal with the aggressive ones, it shows that when you get to the top level, it comes down to the playstyle.
Right.
You know, so my playstyle may be good against, like, you know, it may be good against, like, for example, KO's Yun. You know, my Yang style may be good against KO's Yun. But then my style with Yang is probably not good against, like, Issei or Yakun, because they're just so used to it.
Right.
You know, and that's just a difference in playstyle. And yeah. That's generally that's what it comes down to when you get to the highest level, you know.
So, would you say that red parries are under-practiced?
Very, very much so. Very much so. It's something that I try to encourage players that are on that transition phase. So in your case, for example, I try to encourage you to try to red parry things.
Yeah.
Hold that is another one. I try to encourage him to start red parrying things, and it's very satisfying to actually see the other player red parry, because then it tells you, okay, you know, now I have to come up with another idea. You know, you have to get creative, and that's the enjoyment.
It's one of those, it's the same concept of, you know, trying to get your opponents to be stronger so that you can level up yourself.
Exactly. It's like a Goku thing, you know, he wants to fight the strongest opponent so that in turn he gets stronger. But in this particular case, it's always fun to have that back and forth mentally with the other player. Obviously, there are certain situations where the player would do something silly, but then, you know, you kind of get over it and you're just like, okay, as a player, what can I do to alleviate this?
Right. So, do you actually go through and do like exploration or creativity sort of training, like looking for set plays? Or do you just sort of use information that you think is most solid?
Me personally, I don't particularly go for too much set play. I mean, contrary to what the name of my show is, or the name of my stream is, but it's set play in a simplistic sense. What does that mean? It means basically it's the rock paper scissors when I knock you down.
Right.
You know, so with Yang, if he knocks you down after EX slashes in the corner, it's like that alone is a set play.
Right.
In a sense, because there are so many varying options that I have that it's like you have to guess what to do. And that's the whole concept behind set play. You know, you have to force the opponent to sort of guess what you want to do next, you know? So with that in mind, what I strictly try to do, you know, with that in mind, the set play aspect is that I kind of try to comment on what the opponent might be thinking, you know, what I'm thinking right now, the adjustments that I try to make, and all that culminates into the set play aspect. You know, it's not mainly just like, okay, the timing of this dive kick is going to land me here, but it's a trick, so I'm going to land in front of them. You know,
right.
There's hardly anything like that. The only times that I go for that is in specific situations. So a lot of times you'll see me go for strong, fierce, fierce with Yang, the chain into super. And I mainly get that super on the third round, so that way I can commit to that sort of quote unquote set play. You know, so that way it's a rock, paper, scissors. It's the opponent doesn't know where to block. The opponent doesn't know what's coming. The opponent is forced to commit to something that they otherwise might not commit to, generally. You know, so it's in that situation, that's when I like to use the set play, when it's a decisive blow, basically.
Right. And when it forces like their hand in a way.
Exactly. Yeah.
Because when they see this once as opposed to seeing it 3 times, you know, there's a lot more that you have to think about, and it's a lot harder to defend against.
Exactly. And that's why when it comes to like set plays with like, you know, Yan, Yang, Ken, you know, sometimes Akuma, there are certain things that, you know, you kind of want to just show once, and there are other things that you can show multiple times, but if you have a variance to it, then it makes it more effective.
Right.
You know, so one time we were discussing the launcher into chain combo with Yun.
Yep.
Against Makoto, and it's like launcher into chain combo is pretty good because you get to do anything else afterwards. That's a set play right there.
Right.
Whereas if you do something like low strong up kicks, Yun as a character, he gets a free dive kick afterwards, and he can either cross up, land on the same side, you know, empty jump into command grab, something else to kind of force the opponent's hand. You kind of get that multiple option scenario with the low strong up kicks.
Mm-hmm.
With the launcher into chain combo, it's very simplistic. It's like the opponent knows you're going to land in front of them, you know?
Right.
So
you could land behind them.
Exactly.
Walk.
Exactly, and right there, that's the scenario that goes into the opponent's head. They're like, "Damn, I don't know where I'm going to land or where the opponent is going to land, and I don't know what's going to come next." So I had to forcefully guess.
Right. It's like playing online at all times.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. I mean, it's as silly as it sounds. It really is true because the opponent is forced to guess at that point. Whereas, with the low strong up kicks, it's like, yes, you can get a proper, like, confusing mix-up, but it's still visual on the screen. You know, so I can clearly see you dive kicking in front of me, and all I can do is just commit to parry and then block.
Right.
I can just tap forward and then hold it, and what that does is if you hit me with the dive kick, I parry it. If you cross me up, I can most likely block it.
But like we talked about when we went over that situation, there are ways that you can just make it very ambiguous to the point where it's really hard to actually get that timing, because if you mess up by even a frame, you're gonna get hit. And that's like the very top yuns like Dedun and Sho and Issei and Yakun and stuff like that, like they're all, the only set plays that they do are the ones that allow for that sort of very late decision making.
And it's because of that decision making that I say that it strictly comes down to playstyle at the highest level.
Right.
You know, because there are some characters or some players that are not really too familiar with the set plays, so they just keep you in front of them, you know?
Right.
You know, they would keep you in front of them, and it's like you can just simply...
It's still rock, paper, scissors, like in most...
Yeah, it's still rock, paper, scissors. Whereas other players, they would be comfortable with the set play and just constantly go for it, but then they have that variance.
Right.
You know what I mean? So it's something where, like, Sho, he would go for that set play, but then he would mix it up afterwards, and it's so difficult to deal with.
It's like Sho with the crouching roundhouse reset. He uses it more than any other yun.
Exactly, yeah. And that's one of the reasons why, you know, you kind of try to base it on your own playstyle.
Right.
You know? So...
Other players, you know, like Mester, will never do something like that. They'll just be like, I'm getting you to the corner, I'm getting control, and that's my plan.
Exactly. I mean, that's why it's pretty, you know, for him, he's played like that for 10 plus years.
Right.
You know? Whereas Yakun, all the other young players develop their playstyle, and their situation analysis, it's based on their playstyle. So, you know, it's all a matter of how the actual player deals with it, and that's why when you get to the higher level, it strictly becomes about you as the player, the decisions you make, and the playstyle.
Right. So we've talked a lot in, like, earlier in the episode about creating game plans, and we said we would eventually come to it. So I think now is the best time to do that, because as we just showed, you know, the game plan between Sho with his reset and with Mester is completely different. Their goal is different when they're using their Genajin, right? So, you know, how do you create game plans? You know, what's that thought process like? And how does that game plan change from, you know, opponent to opponent, even within the same matchup? Or, like, if you were to play a character, like, how it can vary, like, you know, with the Sho resets versus, you know, just getting that corner pressure that Mester likes to do.
So, in general, when it comes to developing game plans is something that, as players, we should have one when we get to the average to above average level.
Okay.
And then from there, develop it. because at that point we're starting to develop our style and it coincides with that. So let's say if I'm a very aggressive player, which, you know, obviously I am.
Right.
As an average player, I'm going to look to be aggressive like that. You know, I'm developing my playstyle as such. My game plan has to revolve around that aggressiveness. It has to strictly tell my opponent, okay, I'm going to come for you, and your weaknesses are going to be on your wake up, and I'm going to find some way to knock you down.
Right.
Obviously, that coincides with the matchup knowledge too, but that basically it's like, you know, matchup knowledge and then developing your game plan from there. So the reason why I say that is because the matchup knowledge will lead to the openings that you get for your game plan.
Right.
So let's take for example, let's take Yang versus Dudley.
Okay.
Right. Specifically, or rather, Yang versus Alex. It's more simplistic this way.
Okay.
So Yang versus Alex. Obviously, I mentioned that low fierce is a pretty good normal to use. Versus Alex. You know, it's good as an anti-air. It's good for 2 hits, and it's long distance. You know, it'll stuff out his low normals, so it's pretty useful. Standing forward is good. And all of these normals I'm thinking about, those are just keep away normals.
Right.
Right? One of the matchup specific things that I like to do against Alex is low forward, light punch slash, and then low jab afterwards. That low jab after the light punch slash dictates that Alex can't do anything afterwards.
Right.
Now that means that he can't press anything because the light punch will beat it. He can hardly jump out because the light punch will stuff him. And it's one of those normals that he's forced to parry afterwards.
Right.
And that alone, that concept alone, where I'm like, I'm telling you, I'm forcing you to parry me now.
You're conditioning them is what you're doing.
Exactly. I am forcing you to parry my normal now, because otherwise you can't do anything. And I'm going to just completely, you know, I'm going to do low forward, light punch slash, low jab, standing short, jab slash, standing short, jab slash, jab slash. And I'm going to keep on going through this whole aggressive mindset until I find that opening, or until I completely nullify you into a state where you're blocking. And again, that feeds into my playstyle. It feeds into the matchup. And it feeds into that game plan.
Right.
So I'm basically forcing Alex to stay on the ground. That's my game plan. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, if at any point he parries and then jumps, that tells me, okay, he's going to look for this parry now. So now I can probably start doing low forward, jab slash, command grab afterwards.
Right, or walk up.
Or walk up grab. Exactly. And you see how immediately you came up with that option. It's like all of it is coming back to my play style and my whole game plan. So that's me knocking him down. And then from there, I can just continue that pressure all day on the ground. Now, let's say the Alex player jumps around. Let's say he's a player that likes to do stomp or jump or whatever the case is. Let's say he does stomp after the low forward slash.
Okay.
If the low jab doesn't beat him on startup, at best, I get to react to the stomp and parry afterwards, or block.
Right.
So, in essence, I'm able to react to whatever else he does afterwards. Now, let's say if he's one of those that plays a spacing game and is like mid-screen away, right? Let's say he's trying to get in by jumping. Again, the normals that I mentioned, far standing forward, low fierce, and even super, is something that I can use to nullify that jump.
Right.
So all of that culminates into the game plan that I have for Alex, and it's one of the reasons why it's a tough matchup. As a character, it's a tough matchup because of the normals, and as a player, my aggressiveness will feed into that matchup.
But I think also it's important to understand what you're explaining is that you're using the tools that you have available to shut down one of Alex's strengths, which is his jumps, right? And his ability to get in. You know, similar to Dudley. But that is contrast to the playstyle that you would normally like to have. You like to be aggressive, but for the most part, those sort of, keep away things are not really aggressive in nature, right?
Well, they're not necessarily keep away. To clarify, they're not necessarily keep away. It's more of like
control.
Control, exactly. I like to think of it more as control rather than keep away, because keep away I can do jump back fierce.
Right.
I can backdash. I can do things like that. I can teleport under him to kind of keep him away from me. But I'm not afraid of Alex.
Right.
So as a player, I'm using that to control him, and that's the one portion of the game plan that players have to understand. It's having control in that matchup.
And that also forces Alex to make different decisions if you're, successfully anti-airing him a lot or whatever. It forces those empty jumps. It forces the Genki bombs. It forces whatever.
And all of that will be something that's apparent to you as a player, and you'll start to say, okay, I'm forcing him to jump in now. That's a free super. Right. I'm forcing him to stay grounded. That's free pressure. That's a free command grab.
Right.
So these type of things you can kind of implement with your own character. Like, for example, Urian versus Hugo, that's a pretty good one. You can keep away with, torch strong, standing forward, low forward, standing fierce, jump roundhouse. And then if he starts jumping, standing strong into fireball, standing strong EX headbutt, standing strong EX Aegis.
Right.
So it's developing those options based on the matchup, and then culminating that into your game plan. Now let's say if you wanted to play keep away. Let's say if my style was very defensive, and I didn't want to approach any of the big characters because I'm scared of their options. But for some reason I'll be scared of their options.
Okay.
That's when I would start doing things like jump back fierce. I would start abusing that far standing forward a lot more. I would start using forward fierce a lot more. I would start using low forward, low roundhouse, like the long distance normals that create like a barrier around the character.
Right.
And I would get my damage and then stay at least outside grab range, or at least outside a normal distance. So that way I can safely pressure and safely dive kick without really putting myself at a risk. That's the keep away style that you can apply.
Right.
With Yang. And again, all that falls into the game plan.
So basically, like all these game plans that you're talking about is like how you approach just the character, right? So would you say that game plans can change based on the opponent themselves, or would you consider those adaptations?
Both, because let's say if I'm playing against...
Because you mentioned in Japan that when you played against aggressive Makoto players that you had issues.
Yeah.
So how would your game plan change from dealing with a mellow sort of, neutral-based, Makoto versus a very aggressive Makoto?
Exactly. So with this, let's say if I'm playing against a mellow Makoto, right? Okay. Again, I'm safely pressuring, and the adjustment that I have to do is I have to play the matchup first. So that's why I say the game plan derives from the matchup knowledge. So you play the matchup, let's say it's a one game in a tournament, right? You play the matchup as best as you can. You know what Yang's normals are. You know that you can kind of safely get in with dive kicks because she doesn't have much to do after.
Right.
Have any, low forward shorty or strong fierce into fireball super. She doesn't have any of that. So dive kicks are pretty safe in that matchup, or relatively safe. Obviously, they can command grab afterward, but they're relatively safe, so to speak. So that's a general matchup knowledge that I have, right?
Right.
Now, let's say I'm playing against the mellow Makoto, and I do dive kick, and every situation that I do dive kick, they block.
Right.
But versus the aggressive Makoto, every time I dive kick, they parry. What does that tell me? Against the Mellow Makoto, I can safely dive kick all day and pressure them whenever I want, right? Against the aggressive Makoto, I have to worry about that parry into command grab, because then that leads into 100%. That leads into, standing fierce into Hayate into super. It leads into a lot of things. So that alone will determine how I play the match. If I'm playing against an aggressive Makoto, my aggressiveness versus theirs, it's difficult to, I guess it's difficult to remain consistent,
right?
In a sense.
But that's where the adjustments and adaptations come in, where like
exactly,
instead you have to be doing empty jumps or light kick dive kicks to whiff in front, or jumping over them and making a decision.
Exactly, and that's why, as the matchup unfolds, I can sort of develop my game plan at that point and say, okay, this is based on the player. I know how to approach this player now. I can't do dive kicks against the aggressive Makoto. So let me do a short dive kick, land in front of him, and then grab. Let me see what happens here. Ultimately, it still leads into the way that I want to play in terms of my style. Right. I want to knock him down. I want to get that mix up. I want to force him to guess, And that's the whole process that you take. You go from the matchup and you develop it from there into the game plan, and you base it off of the style that you have. So that's why, as a fundamental aspect, it's very important to build the foundation of a play style. And that's why, in terms of criticism for you, a lot of players had said...
That's one of my biggest issues, is that I don't have a style.
Exactly, and it's one of the reasons why you can't necessarily develop a game plan, because you don't have that play style to adhere to.
Right.
It's like you're in between, Now, you can be in between and confused about both, but it's going to be difficult to make adjustments based on that.
Right.
So, again, for everyone who kind of wants it to be broken down, it's matchup knowledge. Obviously, if you're an average to above average player, it's matchup knowledge. And then developing the game plan and adhering that game plan to your play style. So it may work differently for a lot of other players, but in general, it's a sense where the top players will always have that. They will always have that sort of fundamental knowledge of the matchup, their game plan, their play style, and then all the adjustments they make, it's based on their experience.
Right. And then, like, if you're playing a long set with someone, every adaptation and every, way that you approach things may change your game plan a little bit. But, it's how those adaptations are forcing you to change your game plan that, make it effective or make it worse.
Well, this is a thing that I kind of want to stress, because it's not really about changing your game plan, in a sense. Again, your game plan is something where it's based on your playstyle, right?
Right.
So let's say, again, I'm an aggressive player by nature. I like to get that knockdown and force the opponent to guess.
Mm-hmm.
In that situation with Alex, whether he's a jumping Alex or a ground game or even the Makoto, in either case, my game plan is still to knock them down and to force their specific options.
Right.
So with Alex, I want to force him to sort of with grab. I want to force him to sort of stomp, because that puts him at a bad position. And in either case, whether I play the safe keep away or excuse me, not the safe keep away, but whether I control him in the ground or control him in the air, either way, I still want to force that knockdown.
Right.
And that's a part of my game plan. You never want to deviate from your game plan, because otherwise you'll start second guessing yourself. And in the middle of a match, you cannot second guess yourself, because it has to adhere to your plan. Let's say, for example, a Urian player, or for simplicity's sake, we'll say a Ken player.
Okay.
Right? We'll say a Ken player is, knocking down a Chun-Li player, and they're sort of worried about the wake-up guest parry.
Okay.
They still have that. They still have that knockdown, and what that Ken player is looking for is a whiff. You know, and if the opponent is waking up and guest parrying, they're basically deciding second. They're basically deciding, okay, I'm going to parry here, and then either press a standing roundhouse, press a back fierce into fireball super, press a low forward into super, and that's heavy damage. You know, so as a Ken player that's looking for the knockdown, what can he do against that?
Throw.
He still wants that knockdown in general as the game plan. He wants that whiff. He wants that extra damage. So what can he do? He can grab the opponent multiple times.
Yep.
Or he can just jump over him to avoid the guest parry altogether. Because if you think about it, if I'm jumping towards Chun in the corner, I'm not going to cross her up, but the fact is that I'm still avoiding that whole guest parry on the ground.
Right.
Now
they're guest parrying when you're going to hit her, and you can control that.
Yeah, exactly. It's either you guest parry forward or don't guest parry at all. And either way, that's better than, dealing with the guest parry forward or down and then have to worry about a super. So in that sense, you can kind of keep the same game plan, but just make that adjustment in terms of your decisions based on what the player is doing.
Right. So that's why, in general, jumps are a lot more effective against players that, are a little bit more guess happy.
Or simply grabs.
Right.
If they like to guess on wake up, then you grab. If they like to jump, then it's okay to jump with them, because when you do that, chances are the situation is going to be reset afterwards. If they hit you.
Right.
So
especially heavy, you'll go far away.
Exactly, and it's okay to have that type of situation, but then you'll just have to start from the matchup again, try to find that opening, and then go from the game plan from there.
Right. So, that's a very good explanation as to like how you would create game plans, right? I mean, other players may have different approaches, which is, something we're going to go into in the future with other guests. But, with training being the main focus of this sort of podcast, what are some tools that you wish Third Strike had that may or may not exist, or that you don't use properly, like with the new Groflon training mode, which obviously still needs some work, but unfortunately they sort of abandoned the project. Like, what sort of other functionality do you feel would greatly benefit Third Strike?
Well, if we're taking from other games, I know Street Fighter V has the frame data.
With Tekken, with you pay $3 and you can see if you're plus or where you are. Yeah, it's part of their DLC stuff.
It's the training mode in Street Fighter V. You had to pay for that too, or no?
No. Just in Tekken, the frame data part.
Okay, thank goodness this isn't Tekken. But no, in all seriousness, the training mode in Tekken, Jesus Christ, the training mode in Street Fighter V is, from what I've heard, I've never really touched Street Fighter V like that. Right. I never even went to training mode for it, so I don't know exactly the full functionality. But if there's anything that I wish that Street Fighter 3 had, it was the frame data. It would be the frame data for all the characters, to find out what's plus, what's negative, because at the same time, it's based on the distance too.
Right.
So Ibuki's down forward medium kick, that slide that she does?
Yeah.
That slide is completely unsafe if it's done point blank, obviously. But if it's done at a max distance, it's actually safer than what it seems. It's not all, set in stone.
Right.
So it's something like that where I wish that can be implemented into the training mode aspect. But one of the more important things that I wish was implemented was, so if you haven't already, there's a training mode emulator that I made a video on that showcases all of the little, the charge meters, the parry meters, the Denjin meter, the stun meter.
Yep.
it showcases everything in terms of game mechanics.
The Crystal Cube training mode.
Exactly. It shows you the TKD. It shows you, you know, the lightning legs partition. It shows you how much charge meter you have for the character. It shows you everything. You know, those type of options, I really wish were available in training mode, because those go so far into helping the player not only understand the game mechanics, but understand what exactly he's doing wrong in terms of timing or in terms of motion. You know, so if he can have like the inputs, obviously, you know, there are certain training modes that have that. I know Steam has that, PS 30th anniversary has that. But if 30th anniversary had like the parry, you know, the parry window, if 30th anniversary had like the charge meter for Hugo, for Chun, for Urian,
like
for Remy,
render views and all that stuff.
Exactly. All of those different views, even to show like there's a selection in the training mode emulator where if you hold start on the menu, it shows you how your inputs affect the game, in the sense that, let's say if the character is stunned, if you mash the inputs, there's a bar that will increase according to what you're inputting in the game.
Right.
So you can kind of determine what's the best way to sort of mash to get out of a stun. What's sort of the best way to mash in terms of building up Denjin, you know? So it's little things like this that can not only build an understanding for the players, but sort of get them to fix the inconsistencies that they have when it comes to playing.
Right.
So it can be something as simple as, man, why am I missing this parry? Oh, it's because you're holding it. You're not just down parrying and then going back to neutral.
Right.
You know, because there's a difference. And you would be able to see that in that type of training mode. So if you haven't already, you know, this is kind of like a shameless plug, but you know, try to check out the training mode emulator. It works, you know, obviously for the NFBA emulator, and it allows you to see all of that. And I can almost guarantee, I don't want to guarantee, but it can almost guarantee that it will benefit you in some way, shape, or form.
As a warning, though, it is incredibly crappy on Windows 10. So if you're on Windows 10, it may be worth having a, you know, partition of some sort to have Windows 7 or Windows XP or whatever, just for the training mode if that's what you want, because there's way too much input delay otherwis. Yeah, like if you actually want to use it for, like, you know, like
practicing stuff,
practicing and diagnosing issues and stuff, like you need it to be under relatively ideal conditions, because if it's too crappy, then you're not going to get anything out of it.
Otherwise, you know, you can still develop the data from there. Obviously, you know, in terms of the charges, you'll know exactly how to commit to the charges, even though there may be some input delay or whatever the case is for some people. But the fact is, you still see that data there, and it's extremely useful for anybody who is looking to, you know, try to learn lightning legs partitions, try to learn, you know, how to store Hugo's 360,
right?
You know, how to actually commit to these things. So little things like that will make all the difference. So hopefully it helps you guys.
So basically just combining what we've had in the past with Street Fighter V.
Yeah, pretty much.
Well, maybe as a community,
but
we can work together to, you know, fund a training mode, because we can obviously find someone that has enough LUA experience to do something like that. But you know, as the Groflon guy showed, is, you know, you can only have it as a passion project for so long.
Yeah.
You need to be able to not only please people, but like have an end goal. But yeah. So I mean, do you have anything else you want to add?
This is Third Strike, guys.
This is Third Strike.
keep on playing.
You want to plug your YouTube, your Twitter, your Twitch, whatever you want to do?
For anyone that doesn't know, shameless plug again. My YouTube is SF3LP. I make pretty much a coverage on a lot of different characters, different matchups, and admittedly, I haven't really been up to date with it. But there's still a lot of knowledge on there that's useful for, for low level to up and coming to top player status. Although top players would probably know half of it, they would probably know majority of it.
Or they've already watched your videos.
Or possibly, yeah. But the whole fundamental idea behind my YouTube channel is to sort of show the progression. So if you're a new player and you're trying to get into this game because you enjoy it, there are a lot of resources out there that will help you, aside from the resources that me and Shotokan provide. There's frame data that you can find. There's there's discords that you can go into where people will be more than happy to give you knowledge or even talk to you about what you're going through in terms of your character. And yeah, I mean, it's something where if you really want to take that extra step to benefit yourself, or rather benefit as a player, then be sure to check it out and see how it's okay to record yourself playing the computer, to winning tournaments, to getting first place in tournaments, to playing the top Japanese players that you used to watch back then. And you can see the progression in your own self, and hopefully find something to be encouraged about. So that's my YouTube channel, SF3LP. I also have a stream, twitch.tv/Nica_KO. And I mainly do my coverages or answer any questions that anybody has regarding the game on my stream. So you can be sure to give me a follow there, and we can all learn Third Strike together.
Well, I very much appreciate you taking some time to be my first guest on
no problem, Collins.
And taking your podcast cherry, so to speak. But hopefully there was a lot of information that people can use to help themselves improve, and we'll see you next time with the next guest. You guys have a good one. Thanks for watching.